Years after the courtroom drama that catapulted her into the national spotlight, Maya Johnson stood on the steps of a courthouse, not as a defendant this time, but as a newly minted attorney. Dressed in a crisp navy blue suit, she looked every bit the part of a legal professional. Yet, for all her accomplishments, she carried herself with the same humility and quiet confidence that had defined her as a teenager. The journey from accused shoplifter to Harvard law graduate had been long and challenging, but Maya knew it was only the beginning. As cameras clicked and reporters jostled for position, Maya took a moment to reflect on how far she'd come. Her first case as an attorney was already making headlines. A class action lawsuit against systemic injustices in juvenile detention centers. It was a cause close to her heart, one she'd championed since her own brush with the justice system years earlier. "This is bigger than me," she told the gathered crowd when asked about the case. "It's about giving a voice to those who've been silenced and ensuring that no child has to face the system alone." Her words resonated deeply, not just because of their content, but because they came from someone who had lived through the struggle herself. Maya's story had become a powerful narrative of resilience and determination. She often spoke about how her experience in Judge Holloway's courtroom taught her two important lessons. First, that knowledge truly is power. And second, that fairness requires constant vigilance. These principles guided her work as she fought tirelessly for marginalized communities, using her platform to advocate for policy changes and greater accountability within the legal system. Judge Richard Holloway, now retired, watched Maya's rise with pride. He kept a framed photo of her on his desk, the two of them shaking hands outside the courthouse on the day her charges were dismissed. Occasionally, he would send her updates or share news articles about her achievements. "You're changing the world, Maya," he wrote in one email. "Keep going." His encouragement meant the world to her, a reminder of how much faith others had placed in her from the start. Maya's impact extended beyond courtrooms and legislative halls. She became a sought-after speaker, delivering lectures at universities, community centers, and international forums. Her talks weren't just about law. They were about hope, perseverance, and the importance of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Students admired her ability to break down complex legal concepts into relatable terms, while seasoned professionals respected her unwavering commitment to justice. "The law isn't just about rules," she often said. "It's about people, about protecting their rights, their dignity, and their futures." Despite her success, Maya remained grounded. She visited her old neighborhood regularly, mentoring young people and encouraging them to pursue their dreams. "If I can do it, so can you," she told them during a workshop at the local library, the same place where she'd spent countless hours studying as a child. Seeing the spark of ambition in their eyes reminded her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. One evening, as she sat at her desk reviewing case files, Maya found an envelope tucked among her papers. Inside was a handwritten note from Judge Holloway, sent without warning or fanfare. "Dear Maya," it read, "I always knew you were special, but watching you change lives inspires me more than you'll ever know. Thank you for reminding us all what true justice looks like." Tears welled up in her eyes as she clutched the note to her chest. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, it was purpose. Every challenge she'd faced, every late night spent poring over textbooks, every moment of doubt, none of it had been in vain. Maya realized that her journey wasn't just about personal triumph. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to believe in themselves and fight for a better world. And so, Maya continued forward, driven by the same passion that had fueled her as a teenager in that Chicago library. She didn't see herself as extraordinary, just someone doing her part to make things fairer, kinder, and more just. But to everyone else, she was proof that one person, armed with knowledge and courage, could indeed change the course of history. As she walked into the courtroom the next morning, ready to argue her latest case, Maya smiled softly, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. The dismissal of the charges against Maya sent ripples far beyond the walls of the courtroom. As she stepped outside, Blinking in the bright afternoon sunlight, she was met with a scene she hadn't expected. Reporters crowding around the courthouse steps, microphones thrust forward, and cameras flashing like strobe lights. Word of her extraordinary performance had spread quickly, thanks to social media posts from spectators who couldn't believe what they'd witnessed. By the time Maya emerged, flanked by her relieved parents, the story had already gone viral. "Maya, over here," one reporter called out, his voice cutting through the buzz of excitement. "How does it feel to walk away from this case?" Maya hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden attention. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, but she knew this was an opportunity, a chance to amplify her voice and bring attention to issues that mattered deeply to her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her composure unwavering despite the chaos surrounding her. "It feels like justice prevailed today," she said, her voice clear and steady. "But more importantly, I hope my experience reminds everyone how critical it is to protect our rights and ensure fairness in the justice system. Too many people are treated unfairly because of stereotypes or mistakes. That needs to change." Her words struck a chord with the crowd. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while video crews captured every syllable. Social media platforms lit up with reactions as people praised Maya's intelligence, courage, and poise under pressure. Hashtags like #TeamLegalProdigy and #JusticeForMaya began trending nationwide. Overnight, Maya became a symbol of resilience and brilliance, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, determination could shine through. In the days that followed, offers poured in from all directions. Universities reached out, offering full scholarships and invitations to prestigious pre-law programs. Law firms expressed interest in mentoring her, eager to nurture her talent. Talk show hosts invited her to share her story on national television, while advocacy groups asked her to speak at rallies and conferences about juvenile justice reform. It was overwhelming, but Maya handled it with the same calm focus she's shown in court. Judge Holloway kept tabs on her progress, sending her occasional notes of encouragement and advice. "You've got a bright future ahead of you," he wrote in one letter. "Never stop fighting for fairness, not just for yourself, but for others who don't have a voice." Inspired by his support, Maya decided to use her newfound platform wisely. She partnered with organizations working to reduce racial profiling and improve access to education for underserved communities. Her speeches often began with the same message: knowledge is power, and fairness is worth fighting for. As months turned into years, Maya's influence continued to grow. She graduated at the top of her high school class, earning accolades not only for her academic achievements, but also for her commitment to making a difference. When acceptance letters arrived from colleges across the country, she chose Harvard Law School, a decision that brought tears of pride to her family's eyes. On her first day of orientation, she carried with her a small notebook filled with quotes, ideas, and lessons learned during her journey. Among them was a handwritten note from Judge Holloway: "The world needs more people like you." Maya never forgot where she came from, or the challenges she'd faced along the way. Each victory, no matter how small, reminded her of the importance of perseverance and integrity. And though she was now surrounded by some of the brightest legal minds in the nation, she remained humble, always quick to credit her success to the love and support of her family, the guidance of mentors like Judge Holloway, and her own unshakable belief in doing what was right. By the time she stood on stage to deliver her valedictorian speech at Harvard's graduation ceremony, Maya had become more than just a lawyer in training. She was a role model, an advocate, and a beacon of hope for countless young people who dreamed of breaking barriers and creating change. As she looked out at the sea of faces before her, she smiled softly, remembering the day a simple game of truth or lie changed everything. For her, and for so many others. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged astonished looks, while Maya's family erupted into quiet cheers from the back row. For her part, Maya remained composed, though a small, relieved smile tugged at the corners of her lips. Before adjourning the case, Judge Holloway addressed Maya one final time. "Miss Johnson, you've taught us all a valuable lesson today, not only about the law but also about perseverance and standing up for what's right. Don't ever let anyone tell you that you can't achieve your dreams. You're proof that intelligence, hard work, and determination can overcome even the toughest challenges." Maya stood up, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said softly. "I won't forget this." As the gavel came down and the courtroom emptied, Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she also knew this wasn't the end. It was a beginning. With newfound confidence and a story that would soon capture the nation's attention, she was ready to step into the next chapter of her life. And Judge Holloway? He couldn't wait to see where her journey would take her. As the courtroom settled into a brief recess, Judge Holloway retreated to his chambers, his mind racing with questions. Maya's performance had been nothing short of extraordinary, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than met the eye. He glanced at the thin file on his desk, labeled simply with her name, Maya Johnson. It seemed too ordinary to belong to someone who had just dismantled legal arguments with the ease of a seasoned attorney. Curiosity got the better of him, and he began flipping through the pages. What he discovered stunned him. Maya wasn't just a bright teenager. She was a prodigy. According to her school records, she consistently scored in the top percentile on every standardized test she'd ever taken. Her IQ was reported to be exceptionally high, placing her among the brightest minds of her generation. Beyond academics, she had already earned recognition for her advocacy work, speaking at community events about juvenile justice reform and systemic inequality. Most impressively, she had recently been accepted into a prestigious pre-law program designed for gifted students, a rare achievement for someone her age. Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair, letting out a low whistle. "Unbelievable," he muttered to himself. No wonder she had handled his hypotheticals with such ease. This girl wasn't just smart. She was destined for greatness. Yet here she was, sitting in a courtroom accused of something as trivial as shoplifting gum. The irony wasn't lost on him. When the session reconvened, Judge Holloway returned to the bench with a renewed sense of purpose. His earlier playful demeanor was replaced by a quiet seriousness as he addressed the court. "Before we proceed further," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "I'd like to take a moment to review some key points." The prosecutor, sensing the shift in tone, straightened up in his seat. Maya remained calm, though her sharp eyes betrayed a flicker of curiosity. She could tell the judge was about to say something important. "Miss Johnson," Judge Holloway continued, turning his gaze toward her, "your defense has raised significant concerns about the reliability of the evidence against you, specifically the lack of credible eyewitness testimony and the questionable legality of the search conducted by law enforcement." He paused, glancing at the prosecutor. "Counselor, do you have any additional evidence to present that directly ties Miss Johnson to the alleged theft?" The prosecutor hesitated, shuffling through his papers again. After a long pause, he shook his head. "No, Your Honor. The case rests primarily on the clerk's identification and the officer's account." Judge Holloway nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention back to Maya. "Miss Johnson, I must admit, you've impressed me today, not only with your knowledge of the law, but also with your composure and integrity. Many adults would struggle to articulate their arguments as clearly and convincingly as you have." Maya inclined her head slightly, maintaining her respectful demeanor. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'm just trying to tell the truth." "And that's exactly what makes this so compelling," Judge Holloway replied. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "You've demonstrated an understanding of legal principles that rivals some of the finest attorneys I've encountered in my career. More importantly, you've shown us all why fairness and due process matter. Without credible evidence, it's impossible to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, sensing where this was heading. Judge Holloway didn't mince words. "Given the circumstances and the lack of sufficient evidence, I see no choice but to dismiss the charges against Miss Johnson. This court cannot convict someone based on speculation or unreliable testimony. Examination to highlight inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. I'd also present any available physical evidence or documentation to support my client's version of events. Beyond that, I'd remind the jury, or in this case, the court, that the burden of proof lies with the prosecution. Without credible evidence, there can't be a conviction. The prosecutor shifted nervously in his seat, visibly struggling to keep up with the rapid-fire exchange. He glanced at his notes again, but they offered little help against Maya's articulate responses. For the first time, it seemed he was outmatched, not by another attorney, but by a high school student. Judge Holloway, meanwhile, appeared thoroughly entertained. "Miss Johnson," he said with a grin, "you're making me rethink my career choices. Maybe I should have been a teacher instead of a judge." The comment drew soft laughter from the spectators, easing the tension in the room. Maya allowed herself a small smile, but quickly returned to her composed demeanor. She understood that while the judge's praise was encouraging, the outcome of the case still hung in the balance. To push further, Judge Holloway posed another question, this one more complex. Let's imagine you're drafting a closing argument for a case like yours today. What key points would you emphasize to sway the jury, or in this instance, the judge? Maya took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts before speaking. First, I'd stress the lack of credible evidence tying me to the alleged crime. Second, I'd highlight the unreliability of eyewitness testimony, particularly when it's based on incomplete observations. Third, I'd argue that the search conducted by the officers violated my constitutional rights, rendering any supposed evidence invalid. Finally, I'd appeal to fairness and common sense, reminding the court that guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that hasn't happened here. Her answer was met with silence, followed by quiet nods from several spectators. Even the bailiff, who had remained stoic throughout the hearing, gave an almost imperceptible nod of approval. Judge Holloway studied Maya intently, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine respect. "You know," he said finally, his tone serious but warm, "you've given us all a lot to think about today. Most adults wouldn't be able to navigate these kinds of questions as effectively as you have. You're not just defending yourself. You're demonstrating why our justice system depends on people who care deeply about fairness and integrity." Maya bowed her head slightly, acknowledging the compliment, but she knew the game wasn't over yet. While she had gained the upper hand, the final decision still rested with the judge. As the hearing moved toward its conclusion, the tension in the room grew palpable. Everyone could sense that something remarkable was about to happen, and Maya was ready to face whatever came next. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted as Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of admiration and determination. He had underestimated Maya at first glance, assuming this would be a routine case involving a teenager caught in a minor legal dispute. But now he realized he was dealing with someone extraordinary, someone who wasn't just playing defense, but was actively dismantling the prosecution's arguments with precision and poise. It was time to raise the stakes. "All right, Miss Johnson," Judge Holloway said, his voice carrying a playful yet challenging tone. "Let's see how far your knowledge goes. If you're as sharp as you seem, you won't mind a few tougher questions." Maya nodded calmly, her hands resting on the table in front of her. She knew this moment was coming. The judge wasn't going to let her off easily, not after she'd proven herself capable of holding her own. But instead of feeling intimidated, Maya felt energized. This was her chance to show that her understanding of the law wasn't superficial. It ran deep. "Here's one for you," Judge Holloway began, leaning forward slightly. "If you were representing yourself in a hypothetical case where evidence was obtained through an illegal search, what steps would you take to suppress that evidence?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Your Honor, I'd file a motion to suppress under Rule 41 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, or its state equivalent. I'd argue that the evidence violates the Fourth Amendment and should therefore be excluded from trial. Additionally, I'd cite precedent cases like Weeks v. United States and Mapp v. Ohio to strengthen my argument. The prosecutor's face reddened as murmurs of approval spread through the courtroom. Even the court reporter paused briefly, glancing up at Maya with a look of surprise. Judge Holloway chuckled softly, clearly enjoying himself. Very good. Now, let's say the judge denies your motion. What's your next move? Maya tilted her head slightly, thinking carefully before responding. I'd appeal the decision, arguing that the denial constitutes reversible error. On appeal, I'd emphasize the importance of upholding constitutional protections to ensure fairness in the justice system. Judge Holloway nodded approvingly. You've done your homework, haven't you? All right. Here's another. How would you handle a situation where conflicting witness testimonies create reasonable doubt? Maya smiled faintly, her confidence growing with each question. Your Honor, I'd focus on cross. Well, I can see why, Judge Holloway replied, chuckling. You've certainly got the makings of one. But let's keep going. Tell me this. If you're innocent, why did the officers arrest you? Maya took a moment to gather her thoughts before responding. Because mistakes happen, Your Honor. And sometimes, people jump to conclusions based on appearances rather than facts. I understand that officers have a tough job, but arresting someone without solid evidence violates due process. The Fourth Amendment protects us all from unreasonable searches and seizures, regardless of age or background. Her words hung in the air, resonating with everyone in the room. For many, including Judge Holloway, it was impossible not to admire her poise and clarity. Most defendants would struggle to articulate such complex ideas under pressure, let alone challenge the actions of law enforcement. But Maya wasn't most defendants. She spoke with the authority of someone who had spent years preparing for moments like this. Judge Holloway nodded slowly, rubbing his chin. Fair point. Let's talk about the search of your bag then. Do you deny that the officers found gum inside? Yes, Your Honor, because they didn't find anything. Maya replied firmly. They searched my bag without probable cause, which makes the entire search unconstitutional. Anything they claim to have discovered is tainted evidence and shouldn't hold up in court. The prosecutor groaned audibly, sinking back into his chair. He glanced at his notes, flipping through pages as if searching for a rebuttal, but nothing came. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. You're quoting case law now, Miss Johnson. Care to name one? Without missing a beat, Maya responded, Mapp v. Ohio, Your Honor. It established the exclusionary rule, which prevents illegally obtained evidence from being used in court. A murmur of astonishment rippled through the courtroom. Spectators exchanged wide-eyed looks, some whispering to each other in disbelief. Even Judge Holloway seemed momentarily taken aback. Well, he said after a pause, I must say, you're making quite the impression here today. Are you sure you're only 16? Maya chuckled softly, the first sign of levity she'd shown since the hearing began. Yes, Your Honor. 16 and counting. Judge Holloway grinned, shaking his head in amazement. All right, Miss Johnson, let's move on to something trickier. Hypothetically speaking, if you were guilty, but still wanted to convince me otherwise, how would you go about it? For a brief moment, Maya hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. Then, with a thoughtful expression, she answered, If I were guilty, Your Honor, I wouldn't try to deceive the court. Justice depends on honesty, even when it's difficult. Lying might work in the short term, but in the long run, it undermines trust, not just in the system, but in ourselves. Her response was met with silence. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though the entire courtroom had collectively held its breath. Judge Holloway stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he broke the silence with a slow clap. Bravo, Miss Johnson. Bravo. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the tide turning against him. Maya, meanwhile, remained composed, her eyes steady and unflinching. She knew she had turned the tables, exposing weaknesses in the case against her while earning the respect of everyone watching, including the judge. As the hearing continued, it became clear that this wasn't just a battle over innocence. It was a masterclass in courage, intelligence, and the power of truth. As the hearing progressed, Judge Holloway found himself more and more intrigued by Maya's performance. She wasn't just answering questions, she was dissecting them, turning each one into an opportunity to highlight flaws in the prosecution's case. Her confidence was magnetic, drawing everyone in the courtroom deeper into the unfolding drama. Even the spectators, who had initially come out of mild curiosity, were now leaning forward in their seats, hanging on her every word. "All right, Miss Johnson," Judge Holloway said, his tone light but probing. "Let's say I believe you about the gum. What about the clerk's statement? How do you explain that?" Maya didn't hesitate. "Your Honor, eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, especially when it's based on partial observations. The clerk admitted they only saw me from behind and couldn't confirm my face. That's not enough to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this line of argument is speculative. We have a witness who identified the defendant." And yet, Maya interjected smoothly, cutting him off without raising her voice. "The law requires evidence to be credible and reliable. A vague identification isn't sufficient. If the court subpoenas the security footage, we'll see exactly what happened." The prosecutor clenched his jaw, clearly frustrated. He hadn't anticipated having to defend his case against someone so well-versed in legal principles. Judge Holloway, however, seemed delighted. "Miss Johnson," he said, leaning forward with a twinkle in his eye, "you're starting to sound like a lawyer. Have you ever considered studying law professionally?" Maya smiled faintly, her cheeks tinged with a hint of pride. "Yes, Your Honor. It's something I've always wanted to do." Maya took a deep breath, collecting her thoughts. "Because the truth matters, Your Honor, and because I can prove it." She gestured toward her attorney, who handed her a copy of the store receipt. "Here's proof that I paid for the water. Additionally, the security camera footage from the store would show that I never picked up any gum. If we subpoena it, I'm confident it will support my story." The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but Judge Holloway held up a hand. "Hold on, counselor. Let's hear her out." He fixed his gaze on Maya. "Miss Johnson, are you saying the footage exists but hasn't been reviewed yet?" "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied. "It hasn't been submitted as evidence, which raises questions about why the prosecution is relying solely on eyewitness accounts instead of concrete proof." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Spectators exchanged glances, some nodding approvingly while others looked skeptical. Judge Holloway, meanwhile, appeared to be thoroughly enjoying himself. "You know," he said with a grin, "you're making this very difficult for me. Most people don't come into my courtroom armed with legal arguments like these. You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Maya allowed herself a small smile. "I'm just telling the truth, Your Honor, and I hope the truth speaks for itself." For a moment, Judge Holloway said nothing. He studied Maya carefully, noting the way she carried herself, not arrogant, but self-assured. It was clear she wasn't intimidated by the setting or the stakes. In fact, she seemed to thrive under pressure, using her knowledge and quick thinking to dismantle the case against her piece by piece. Finally, Judge Holloway sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "All right, Miss Johnson, let's keep going. But remember, truth or lie, one wrong move, and I'll call you out." Maya nodded, ready for whatever came next. She knew this wasn't just a game. It was her chance to prove her innocence and show the world that she wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. And as the hearing continued, it became increasingly clear that Maya wasn't just playing along. She was rewriting the rules. Judge Holloway's eyes sparkled with curiosity as he prepared to dive deeper into the case. He had introduced his little game of truth or lie, with a mix of humor and authority. But now it was time to see if Maya could back up her words with substance. The courtroom fell silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy with anticipation. Even the faint hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade into the background as all eyes turned to the young girl seated at the defense table. "All right, Miss Johnson," Judge Holloway began, his tone light but probing. "Let's hear your first statement. Tell me what happened when you were stopped outside the store. And remember, this is truth or lie. So, make it good." Maya nodded, her expression calm but focused. She didn't hesitate. "Your Honor, I went into the store to buy a bottle of water after school. I paid for it at the counter, put it in my bag, and walked out. That's when 2 officers approached me and accused me of stealing gum. I told them I hadn't taken anything, but they didn't believe me." Her voice was steady, almost matter-of-fact, yet there was an undeniable conviction behind her words. Judge Holloway leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin thoughtfully. He murmured. "Interesting. Counselor." He glanced toward the prosecutor, inviting him to respond. The prosecutor stood up, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, according to the arresting officers, the store clerk identified Miss Johnson as someone who placed a pack of gum in her bag without paying. Furthermore, no receipt for the gum was found during the search." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, but Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hand slightly, signaling she wanted to speak. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to address that." She turned to face the prosecutor, her gaze unwavering. "First, the Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. If the officers didn't have probable cause to search my bag, then any evidence they claim to have found is inadmissible." The room went still. Even Judge Holloway blinked in surprise. Most defendants wouldn't dare challenge the legality of a search, let alone cite constitutional law so confidently. But Maya wasn't done. "Second," she continued, "the store clerk's identification is questionable. They admitted in their report that they only saw me from behind and couldn't confirm my face. That's not reliable evidence." The prosecutor frowned, shifting uncomfortably. He hadn't expected this level of pushback, especially not from a teenager. Judge Holloway, however, looked thoroughly entertained. Well, he said, tapping his pen against the bench. "You're quite knowledgeable about the law, Miss Johnson. Did you pick that up in school?" Maya shook her head. "No, Your Honor. I've been studying law on my own for years. I'm fascinated by how the justice system works, and sometimes how it doesn't." Her honesty struck a chord with everyone in the room. Here was a young girl who wasn't just defending herself. She was exposing flaws in the system with clarity and precision. Judge Holloway leaned forward again, his curiosity piqued even further. "All right, let's move on," he said. "Tell me this. Why should I believe you over the clerk and the officers?" The courtroom was quiet as Judge Richard Holloway entered, his robe flowing behind him like a character from a movie. He carried an air of authority, but there was also something playful in the way he moved and spoke. Known for his unorthodox methods, Judge Holloway had spent decades on the bench handling cases big and small. To some, he was a maverick who brought humanity to the cold machinery of the law. To others, he was simply unpredictable. Today, however, he seemed especially intrigued by the young defendant sitting before him. Maya sat at the defense table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked calm, almost serene, despite the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. The jury box, empty since this wasn't a trial. The rows of wooden benches where spectators whispered quietly, and the imposing bench where Judge Holloway now settled himself. The judge adjusted his glasses and glanced at the file in front of him. Then, with a curious smile, he turned his attention to Maya. Well, Judge Holloway began, leaning forward slightly. His voice was warm but tinged with amusement. "We have a young lady here today accused of shoplifting. A gum thief, no less." He chuckled softly, glancing at the prosecutor and then back at Maya. "Now, I've seen plenty of cases like this, but you—" He paused, studying her carefully. "You don't strike me as your typical troublemaker." Maya didn't respond immediately. She kept her gaze steady, meeting the judge's eyes without flinching. This only deepened Judge Holloway's curiosity. Most teenagers in her position would be fidgeting nervously or avoiding eye contact altogether. But not Maya. There was something about her, her poise, her quiet confidence, that made him want to dig deeper. "I'm going to try something a little different today," Judge Holloway announced, addressing the courtroom. "Let's play a game I call Truth or Lie. It's simple. Miss Johnson will tell us her version of events, and we'll decide if she's telling the truth or trying to pull one over on us." He grinned mischievously, clearly enjoying himself. "What do you say, young lady? Up for it?" The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure how to react. This wasn't standard procedure, but Judge Holloway was known for bending the rules when it suited him. Meanwhile, Maya nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She understood what the judge was doing. He wanted to see if she'd crack under pressure. But instead of feeling intimidated, Maya felt a flicker of excitement. If the judge wanted honesty, she was ready to give it to him. And more. "All right. Here's how it works," Judge Holloway continued, leaning back in his chair. "You make a statement about what happened that day. Then, I'll ask questions to figure out if you're being truthful. If I think you're lying, I'll call you out. Sound fair?" "It sounds fair, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice clear and steady. She offered a polite smile, though her mind was already racing. She knew this wasn't just a game. It was a test, and she intended to pass. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow, impressed by her composure. "Good. Let's get started then." He gestured toward the prosecutor. "Counselor, give us the facts so we know what we're working with." As the prosecutor stood up and began presenting the case against Maya, Judge Holloway listened intently, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. The evidence was thin. A store clerk's vague identification, the officer's account of the arrest, and a receipt showing Maya had purchased a bottle of water but no gum. Still, Judge Holloway didn't dismiss it outright. He believed in fairness, even if his methods were unconventional. When it was finally Maya's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and began sharing her side of the story. Her words were measured and precise, painting a vivid picture of her innocence. But what caught Judge Holloway's attention wasn't just her explanation. It was the way she delivered it. Every sentence was thoughtful, every detail deliberate. It was almost as if she were speaking directly to the law itself, appealing to its principles rather than the people in the room. By the time Maya finished, Judge Holloway was no longer smiling. Something about her testimony resonated with him, not just because it sounded credible, but because it revealed a depth of understanding that few adults possessed. He leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the bench, and studied her closely. Whatever he had expected when he walked into the courtroom that day, it certainly wasn't this. In the heart of Chicago, where towering skyscrapers cast long shadows over bustling streets, lived a 16-year-old girl named Maya Johnson. Maya wasn't like most teenagers her age. While others spent their afternoons scrolling through social media or hanging out at the mall, Maya could often be found sitting quietly in a corner of the local library. Her backpack was always stuffed with dog-eared legal textbooks, and her notebook was filled with scribbled notes about constitutional rights, courtroom procedures, and landmark Supreme Court cases. To Maya, the law wasn't just a subject. It was a passion, a puzzle she loved to solve. Maya's fascination with the law began when she was just 12 years old. Her older brother, Jamal, had been wrongfully accused of vandalism after a misunderstanding at school. Though the charges were eventually dropped, the experience left a deep impression on Maya. She watched as her family struggled to navigate the confusing world of courts and lawyers, and she vowed never to feel powerless again. From that moment on, Maya immersed herself in learning everything she could about the justice system. She devoured books, watched documentaries, and even attended public court hearings whenever she could. Her teachers noticed her sharp mind and encouraged her to pursue her interest further. Despite her brilliance, Maya faced challenges that came with growing up in a low-income neighborhood. Her family worked hard but struggled to make ends meet. Yet, Maya refused to let her circumstances define her. She believed that knowledge was power, and she clung to her dream of becoming a lawyer who could help people like her brother, people who didn't always have a voice in the system. Her determination earned her respect among her peers, though some teased her for being too serious. But Maya didn't care. She knew she was destined for something greater. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Maya walked home from school, her life took an unexpected turn. She stopped by a convenience store to grab a bottle of water before heading back to study. As she stepped outside, two police officers approached her, their expressions stern. They accused her of stealing a pack of gum, claiming they'd seen her slip it into her bag. Maya froze, stunned. She hadn't taken anything, but the officers seemed convinced. No matter how much she protested, they refused to listen. Instead, they handcuffed her and placed her in the back of their patrol car, ignoring her pleas of innocence. Word of Maya's arrest spread quickly through her community. Friends and neighbors rallied around her family, outraged by what they saw as yet another example of injustice. Maya's parents hired a public defender, hoping to clear her name. But as the days passed, it became clear that this case wouldn't be easy. The evidence against Maya was flimsy at best, just the word of the store clerk and the officers. But the system wasn't always fair, especially to young black teens like her. When the day of the hearing arrived, Maya entered the courtroom feeling a mix of nerves and resolve. She wore her best outfit, a navy blue cardigan over a white blouse, and carried herself with quiet dignity. As she sat beside her attorney, she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment would change her life forever. Little did she know, the judge presiding over her case had a reputation for unconventional tactics. What unfolded next would test Maya's intelligence, courage, and unwavering belief in justice, and leave everyone in the room utterly amazed.